Top of the morning to you. This is Idea TV, and it's the newspaper review this morning, this lovely Tuesday morning. I do hear that it's raining in Lagos, while we have a very clear sky here in Abuja. So greeting you and also sending regards to you wherever you might be watching from, all the way from the Federal Capital Territory here in Nigeria, FCT Abuja. Now we'll move on quickly with what exactly we have on our national dailies. My name is Paul Olajbuko. Once again, good morning. We start today with Nigerian Tribune. Guinness Book of World Record confirms Yoda Abbas's largest serving of Nigerian jollof. That is on page 21. And on page 25, we see that Nigeria's inflation rate dropped to 20% in August, according to Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. And then the big story here says, that's on page 15, that PDP demands legal backing for electronic transmission of elections. I guess that's as regards the 2027 election. Says that party not dead, declares confidence in Fubara as emergency rule winds down in Rivers, dismiss relevance of Atiku and others, says reconciliation and also disciplinary measures are in progress. Meanwhile, on page 6, we see a move to reduce federal government stake in joint oil venture capable of undermining Nigeria's sovereignty. That is what Atiku is warning this morning on page 6. And on page 17, we see that Oyo launches Sustainable Social Protection Initiative. That's on page 17. And on page 3, we see that I cannot facilitate Natasha's resumption. That's what CNN is saying. Says Senate court must authorize a return. Meanwhile, on study here, we see that daily walking can prevent back pain risk by 23%. And on page 14, we see that our refinery ended Nigeria's 50-year fuel crisis. That is what Dangote is saying. He continues to say that Dangote refinery, we are creating jobs and not displacing anyone. Industrialization, not importation, will grow Africa's economy. And I guess that's why I was started this morning. The fact that we've come to a moment where we now realize that it is not importing goods that would boost our economy, but rather doing things for ourselves, investing in our economy down here, producing things ourselves, becoming. I mean, if you should look at big worlds today, big countries, that all of those big seven that we all mentioned. If you should look at, actually in places like Asia, specifically in China, Japan, Korea, you see that all of this, especially in Japan, right, it's very evident that they knew that if they don't produce things, they will end up spending more. And so to ensure that there's a boost in the economy, one of the things that they did, one of the strategies that they did was to ensure that they stop importation of goods and start producing, forcing people to produce. And now China is one of those countries that, in fact, there is almost no household in the world that you will not see at least one or two things that is made from China. That is how China has invested so much in themselves. Likewise as well in Japan, we are seeing something similar as well. And that's what Dangote is saying, that it is time for us to industrialize. We should stop looking at outside and try to look inwards and create solutions for what is on ground here in Nigeria. And also we see a report from the NBS saying that inflation has dropped by 20 0.12% in August, and it's amazing. Inflation is dropping. I expect that it drops more, if possible, even to a negative figure. And also, I guess the one that is going to be very interesting to every Gen Z out there currently battling with backache is the fact that daily walking actually at least 10,000 steps a day as recommended, or if you can't do that, at least try to close up the gap. It's close to 10,000 steps, and basically, but that now regular trekking could reduce risk of back pains by 23%, and really that's amazing. We'll move on quickly with a story from the Nation news this morning. It says that judge returns motion by Kanu to CAJ for reassignment, as on page 4. Meanwhile, we see that Dangote Refinery creates 24,000 jobs with 1,000 trucks roll out. That's on page 3. And on page page 2 rather, we see that Tinubu cuts short vacation and is expected to return back today. Meanwhile, on page 5, we see why weak Qatar bridge must be demolished by federal government. That's on page 5. And also we see that inflation slides on stable economic growth, low food prices, as CPI drops to 20.12% for the 5th consecutive month. Meanwhile, on page 27, you see that 4.445 million potential voters pre-registered in INEC in 4 weeks. And we see that JTB, that's the Joint Task Force, OK's NIN, RC as tax ID, and also we see that President's APC slams Atiku over hunger hardship alarm. XGP scores low. The federal government out of touch with positive development. That's on the Nation this morning. I guess I'll start from the story of Tinubu, who went on a vacation. And it's been said that it was meant to be a 10-day vacation, but he has decided, out of the benevolence of his heart, to cut down his vacation to resume back to office today and continue with his presidential duty back at home. Although he was ably represented by the vice president while he was away, but now it's good to have that, to know that our president will be coming back very soon. Also talking about job creation, looking at ways to ensure that youths are employed. I mean, we have about 5.76 million Nigerian youths who are not in employment, not in education, or not in training. And, Dangote has helped in reducing that number, basically, with his refinery. And now he has created another 24,000 new jobs with the rollout of some other trucks. And again, everybody all road is basically heading up to the tax reform that we're expected to kick off in January 2026. Now the Joint Tax Board has come out to say that it's okay to have your NIN as your tax ID or your RC number. That's your the number used to register companies. The registration number for companies basically they are saying it's okay to have these things as your tax identification number, and I feel like that's also that's a good development, and it's great to see that we are really key on this, especially with the reforms and changing things. I guess I'll move on now to the Daily Trust to see what has been said. We see that mafias out to kill my refinery. That's what Dangote is saying this morning. Meanwhile, on page 33, we see here that 3 patients die at AKTH as KEDCO cuts power over debt, and that's on page 11. Meanwhile, on page 20, we see that presidency Atiku trade war over hunger and also poverty. Meanwhile, on page 6, we see that federal government doctors strike, services grounded in hospitals. Meanwhile, on page 10, we see that Tinubu cuts short vacation returns to Nigeria today. Meanwhile, on page 13, the UN warns parties against hate speeches. And then on page 20, on page 2 as well, we see that Kano Maradi rail projects at 60% completion. That is what the presidency. It's saying the big story here. It says that amidst peace deal, bandits abduct 55 in Zamfara. I mean, it was in news a few days ago about how peace is trying not. It's very sad to see once again another story of insecurity dropping again at our feet this morning with this headline from the Daily Trust. It's really sad, but we're expecting to see revolutionization in the next coming days and see changes in the system and actually having a more secure a more secure country at the end of the day. And also as regards doctors as well, we see here that so it's sad to see that doctors are going on strike, and once doctors are going on strike, it means that patients do not have persons to attend to them. And it's sad at the end of the day, but we are hopefully the FCT is able to attend to the doctors, probably clear up their arrears that they are owing them, and also try the best to meet their demands, because they are also asking for more staff as they are short staff. And I think I've been mentioning since yesterday as regards how much of brain drain we are having in almost all of the sectors here in Nigeria. I guess we'll go on a quick break now, and once we return, we'll continue with the newspaper review. We'll be right back.
Robotic Process Automation, RPA. RPA is about automating repetitive tasks that typically require human intervention, whether it's processing invoices in the finance sector or automating customer service interactions. RPA is transforming how businesses operate. The benefit? Employees can focus on higher value tasks, while software bots handle the mundane stuff. However, RPA implementation comes with high upfront costs and requires maintenance. The RPA market is expected to grow from $1.89 billion in 2020 to $13.74 billion by 2028. But companies must balance automation with potential job losses.
Yeah, welcome back. This is still the newspaper review here on Nigeria TV. Good morning if you're just joining us. My name remains Paul. And now we're moving on now to the Guardian newspaper. So we'll look at what exactly is on Tribune, The Nation, and also Daily Trust. And now we're moving on to the Guardian newspaper. It says on page 3 that Nigerians won't accept technical glitch issues. PDP wants INEC. That's on page 3. And on page 4, we see here that federal government suspend free on board, that's FOB levy on imported goods. That's according to the Minister of Economic there, that's Wale Edun. And on page 3, we see here that how my refinery saved Nigeria's oil sector. That's what Dangote is saying this morning. Meanwhile, on page 29, federal government orders relocation of roaming cattle to grazing reserves. That's on page 29. And on page 4, we see that 4.5 billion US dollars fraud. Court grants Emefiele request for forensic examination. And on page 5, we see that Adeleke devastated and lament as flood ravaged Osun communities. That's on page 5. And on page 15, we see that stable exchange rate food prices drive down inflation to 20.12%. And on page 29, peace deal collapse as bandits adopt 40 in Zamfara. Meanwhile, on page 6, we see International Day of Democracy. Nigeria's democracy faces grave threats over hunger, corruption. Article CSOs 1. That's on page 6. And also we see that NMA rejects salary cut for Lagos doctors, faults federal government on funding. And then the big story here is money illusion, fuel fiscal crisis as state debt and deficits soar. That is what is being recorded here on page 6 of The Guardian this morning. Well, I guess I'll start with the news of INEC 2027. There's also been in the news as regards a lot, as we said, as regards INEC and also 2027 election, but I'll just try to compile everything and say it here as well. So I'll start with the story of the fact that INEC has registered about 4.44 million Nigerians as they begin their registration process, potential voters. It's in just 4 weeks, which is a very amazing one, and we'll be expecting to see, meaning that hopefully it's not just about getting this voters card, but also putting it in use when it's time for election, either whatever kind of election, either presidency, state election, state house of rep, or whatever we may have. It's very important to put our voters card into good use and vote the right leader. Also, today as well was a statement from the UN that warning about parties and hate speech and speeches. If you are conversant with social media lately, you've seen how much of back and forth has been going within supporters. I support this party, and so this is, and then because you don't support or you don't agree with my idea, I, one way or the other, send hate speeches to you, say things that are hurtful, say things that shouldn't be said about someone. And it's really sad to see all of these things build up already. And we're still years away from the election, or should I say, we are still years away from the election, actually. We're like 2 years thereabouts away from the election. And we're seeing all of this building up starting from now. It is really not good. It's really sad to see. And then we'll see here about PDP warning INEC as regards there's no excuse this time around. And I guess it's fair to say that over the years, the beavers has been given issues and has not been attended to. So we should be expecting a more improved beavers and upgrading on the system to ensure that it actually functions. I've been on the field once during an election, and I saw a number of beavers being taken or being attended to by a technician that is usually on ground. I mean that there's something still wrong with the beavers. It probably should be taken. I mean, all of this while it should have been checked. The system should have been upgraded to ensure that there's a free flow. And also data should also be should be more robust and also easy to allocate. And also as regards the grazing cattle around the country, federal government has allocated a few areas that are set aside for grazing animals, and they call it the grazing reserves. And it's amazing really to see that the federal government is actually sweeping into action as regards trying to put all of our our cattle into a safe place for them, and make that place so conducive for them so they don't have to move around again. And I'll move on to the Daily Times to see what's been said on the Daily Times this morning. We see here the story from MBS as well. It says that Nigeria's inflation dropped for 5th consecutive time. That's according to the MBS. That's on page 5 this morning. And on page 2, federal government's reforms without human face triggers pervasive hunger, says Atiku. Also, we see here on page 2 that reviving railway key to Nigeria's role as Africa's logistic hub. That's what Shetima is saying. Meanwhile, DMO allots 3.05 billion federal government saving bond in September. That's on page 13. Meanwhile, on page 8, you see here that court declined motion seeking Nnamdi Kanu's transfer to the National Hospital. Meanwhile, on page 6, submit your summon for approval, says Niger's governor. That's what he's telling the clerks in Niger State. And on page 7, infrastructure development embrace Tinubu with both hands. Umar tells the Southeast, that's the Southeastern brothers. Meanwhile, we see here in the big news that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu halts vacation to stabilize security and also review economic policies. Okay, that's coming from the presidency this morning. It's a very interesting one on the Daily Times this morning. I guess I'll start with a story of the state governor asking all of the clerics in Niger State that before you go to your members and preach to your members, it's very important and very paramount for you to come out with your sermon and present it for approval before you go on to preach your sermon, which is a very interesting one, exactly. And it raised a thought in my mind that who's going to be reviewing the sermon, what should be allowed in the sermon, and what shouldn't be. Is the churches or places of worship, the mosques and also the churches, are they now like schools where teachers have to, and then the pastors as teachers that they are, have to submit their lesson notes, which is now their sermon, to somebody, a supervisor, to go through it and then tell them to remove this part and remove that part, so to modernize or I really don't understand the concept behind this, but it's a very interesting one. And also yesterday as well, we saw as how the courts decided that Nnamdi Kanu shouldn't be transferred to the National Hospital, which is on page 8 of the Daily Times this morning. And I guess we'll go straight up to another story still on Daily Times, talking about how the president has decided to halt his vacation to stabilize security and also review economic policies. I mean, there are lots of economic policies that are currently on the way now, that are currently going on now, and it's really lovely to see that the president is halting his vacation just to attend to all of these things, because there are some things that are pressing and shouldn't have to wait so long. So, but most likely, he's also done with his trip, and that's why he's cutting it short. He's cutting his vacation short because he still has, I think, few days to the end of his vacation. And then we see here the face of Alausa, that's the Minister of Education, on the Punch newspaper this morning, as SANU and NASO issues strike notice over unpaid allowances. That's on page 21 of the Punch newspaper this morning. And on foreign exchange inflow, reserve boosts Naira to about $1,497 per Naira. Meanwhile, on page 2, we see that Tinubu Fubara ends foreign trip as IBA set to hand over. And also on page 21, we see that President fires back as Atiku warns of revolution. Meanwhile, Dangote vows refinery will not fall to oil mafias. That's on page 23. And on page 7, we see that Southeast begins behind as Southwest maintains voters' pre-registration lead. Meanwhile, on page 4 and 5, we see 2 Nigerians inmates were arrested after jailbreak, that is in Nepal. Meanwhile, on page 23, we see that federal government suspend controversial 4% import duty levy. And the big story, farmers fault federal government's order as agro imports hit 2.2 trillion. So that's as regards the food price crash. Well, when it comes to food, yeah, especially in Nigeria, I know it's a whole lot of conversation, and it is, I really do not know how to put it in words. But, it's one of the interesting things is the fact that we as a country, we produce rice. In fact, there are a number of species of rice that are available here in Nigeria: the short grains, the long grains, the local rice. All of it, call all of what you want to eat. It's a whole lot. And we have several species here in Nigeria, not even in neighboring countries like Ghana or wherever. Here in Nigeria, we have all that it takes, actually. And it's amazing. I call it amazing to see, because even with all of that, with all of our productions, purchasing local rice is more expensive than having to import rice from places like the Gambia, Ghana, and other African countries. And it begs to differ that if I can get a cheaper rice from outside, why do I have to patronize the farmer that is just beside me? Hence the need for agro imports, basically. So it's more about how the government should help in reducing the cost of production, especially for farmers, probably subsidize some things for them, create subsidies that help these farmers, probably subsidies for seedlings, stipends and things like that. Just try to, probably it could be conditional cash transfers. There are a lot of things that the federal government to do to help all of these things. And if all of these things are put in place, and also proper industries to help process it again, because I do understand that one of the places where farmers usually will find it hard is sometimes there are no processing companies around. They have to travel for a very long while, somewhere very far from their farm, to be able to process whatever they have produced, talking about rice, corn, and the likes. And hence, at the end of the processing and all of that, by the time the final product comes out, what comes out is more expensive than you having to import rice into the country. And that is what the farmers are shouting out this morning, that, okay, please help us so that we are able to gain from this as well. And as regards football as well, I mean, we're counting down so much. 2 days to go now, and we're expecting the governor, Fubara, back in power, back in office. I guess that's all we have to take this morning on the newspaper review. My name remains Paul. Do not forget to follow us on all our social media platforms on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and X, and also LinkedIn at Idea Television. And also, you could also read up more for more news on www.ideatv.live. And my name remains Paul Oladipupo. This was the newspaper review. See you tomorrow.